Got it. Thanks, Zoom. I don't know if anybody hears that from me. Do you hear that too, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice to know. It's good to know. All right. I see everybody is coming on in. This is wonderful. We are so excited for what we can already tell is going to be a very well attended and exciting event. We're going to give just another minute or so as we allow for a critical mass to join before we officially get things kicked off. I see a guitar neck behind you, Mike. One of these days, you're going to have to play for us on one of these calls. You got to do like the little intro. We'll make a little intro ditty.
I'll work on my flamenco.
Yeah. All right. Great. Look at everybody coming on in. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Okay. I think we are ready to get going because I know we've got quite a lot of wonderful information to cover today. And we are right at the top of the hour. So I will officially welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kelia Garrido. I head up marketing and events here at Great Data Minds. GDM, if you don't know us already, we are a collective of passionate data activists, and we're on a mission to modernize the world of data. So we do this in two different ways. The first is that we have our services arm. This is at GDM Innovation Labs. This is where we do our strategic planning, our education, and the deployment of critical data projects. And then we also have GDM.com, Great Data Minds, where we're creating content, we're hosting great events, we're running our podcast, and we're interviewing transformational thought leaders and looking at cool technologies, just like what we're going to do today. So a little bit of housekeeping before we officially get started. This is a webinar, and I know you all know what that means. Your cameras and microphones are off, but we do welcome and encourage conversation. You can do this either in the chat or in the Q&A, which has been turned on as well. So if you have something to say, please do share it, and we'll make sure that we get to all questions in some space that we reserve for a more formal Q&A at the end of the session. And so today, without further ado, we are going to hit our next episode in our Thought Leadership series. This is where we interview big thinkers on topics that are relevant to the world of data and analytics. So I am very excited to introduce today's special guest. We have Lee Feinberg with us on the line. So for the last, we are happy to have you, Lee. This is good. I have to tell you, we're seeing a lot of registrations coming in, so you're doing something right, sir. I want to hear about it today. So a little bit more about Lee. For the last 15 years, Lee has been helping people and businesses change the way that they present and consume data. He is the author of the internationally recognized ebook called Write Your Charts into Data Stories. We're going to share a link with you so that you can download this ebook for yourselves. We'll get that going during our session today. He's also run analytics teams and helped data megaliths like Verizon and Ford Motor Company improve how they look at data. He is a data literacy expert through and through, and we are sure going to learn from him today. Thank you so much for being here, Lee.
Yeah, happy to be here and looking forward to a good conversation.
Yep, we're going to get it done. Of course, the other expert we have on the line today is our own Mike Lampa. He is our Chief Analytics Officer here at Great Data Minds and GDM Innovation Labs. He has got a ton of strategic and practical data and analytics experience, both as an enterprise user and as a consultant. And he's been working with some of the world's most prestigious brands. So this guy is not only the one that does our interviews, but he also keeps the projects running smoothly. And I don't know where we'd be without him. Mike, thank you for being here as always.
Well, thank you, Kayla. You're always so kind to me. I got to send you another box of chocolates.
That's it. Or you could just play your guitar. Play your guitar for me one day. That would be just as good.
No, that's just holding up the wall over there. Hey, Lee, how are you today, sir?
Hey, Mike. I'm doing well.
Good.
We got sunshine.
Yeah, we do it too. Unfortunately, not like some of our brethren down in Florida right now, right?
Yeah.
So really thrilled to have you here, my friend. And I'm really excited to dig in and allow you to share with our audience some of the cool thoughts and approaches that you take. So without further ado, let's get into it. So why are we here? What's the problem or the opportunity that we're trying to address, Lee?
Yeah, the thing that I ran into I struggled through this, and this is one of those classic cases of you have a personal problem and then it turns into something else. In this case, turned into a business. And so I've been a data practitioner and person who was responsible for figuring out how to get the data in a way to people that they could understand it. And I noticed that the teams I was running and the other people I worked with, it was kind of chaotic. And in the early days, of course, you had PowerPoint and Excel, and then you started having more sophisticated tools proliferate. And somehow it didn't make the problem better, almost seemed to make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a head scratcher, right? Well, these software is always supposed to make it better. That's the pitch, but why isn't it? And I realized that it was because while people knew how to use the software, everybody just used it in a different way. There was no consistency in how teams were using it. So that's where it started to become chaotic. And I realized we need a way to work, to do the work in a consistent way, because that's the only way, number one, that a team can be organized, but also even a company can scale up these kinds of work. And that's become extremely relevant today, more so than ever, right? Because as you said, people talking about data literacy, data storytelling, these new concepts, we have to get the fundamentals in line before we can do these kind of higher order things. So, so that was kind of the problem I saw is, how do we corral this down and create some kind of framework or model or process, whatever you want to call it, so that people could learn it and then execute and do it and make it part of how they just did their work.
So consistency is definitely the key theme I heard there. And I think I'm picking out a hint there that software is not the problem. Because we got some incredibly more sophisticated BI platforms today, right? Yet, when I see research come out from the likes of Gartner, where they say maybe 21% of all dashboards deployed ever get used, I mean, that's abysmal, right? Yeah. So
a lot of wasted work,
right? So what's the approach? How do we start to solve the problem?
Yeah, so I'll give you an analogy about kind of how I started to think about this. And so if you think about the way people talk about data, one of the popular things, I guess it's not as popular these days, you don't hear it as much, but everybody say data is strategic. That was right. And of course that makes sense. But when you think about a company and how it executes its strategy, you have groups like finance and marketing, sales, human resources, right? Software development. And those are all strategic to the company. And the thing that they have in common is that they all typically have some kind of structure about how they do their work, right? And that's what I started to model this against. Like, well, okay, if finance has income statements and balance sheets, and marketing has, a variety of things. It has the 4 Ps, which we all learn, and software has software development lifecycle and so on, right? But we have nothing on our side for people who are either data practitioners or people who are going to be storytellers, things like that. So that was the first kind of recognition that we need to have something parallel. And only, I think, by the fact that I have a variety of backgrounds. I was an engineer by schooling and really became more of a marketer and a product manager in my working career, and then ended up working in data analytics as an offshoot of that. And it occurred to me that when we were doing our work, we would, if you and I were having a conversation and you were asking me to create some set of, I'll use the term dashboard, but I really don't like the term, but let's say dashboard. And I would say, what do you want, right? And you would tell me some things, and I would think of you as my customer, right? But the problem is, I wasn't really treating you as a customer because I was just creating something without really understanding what you wanted necessarily. You might tell me what you want, but it might be not really what you were trying to achieve with it. And so I said, well, it kind of occurred to me, what if we think about the work as creating a product? So not creating a dashboard. I mean, that's the thing. But what if all of it was a product process? And that changed my thinking completely. I said, well, okay, now I can model the work against that idea and use different pieces of how people do that work in other ways, and kind of take the best of all of that and figure out how to apply it to that. And that was kind of the foundation of this idea I call design to act now. It's grown over the years, but it's kind of have that grounding in you're creating a product, not building charts and not making the charts in the dashboards. That's just kind of the work of it, right? So you have to almost change the way people perceive what they're doing as well, not just give them a process, but give them an idea to kind of shift them out of this activity mode. I'm making charts, I'm making dashboards, I'm publishing them to the web, whatever. So that's the core of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I love the whole analytic product mindset, right? Because that implies there's a whole life cycle around that product, right? And it's designed to address a need, a true need. Yeah, interesting. So talk to me a little bit about this design to act.
Yeah, and so I certainly didn't come up with that name early on. It was kind of evolved over time. But I had the idea, and then it was really, okay, well, what are the pieces of that? And I could actually just throw up a little slide here just to illustrate it a little bit. Let's see. Share desktop 2. See if we can get this thing up here. I'm not going to run through all the details of this, but it's really the three top elements that I think are really important. So as I mentioned before, a lot of times people get the software, right? And you can teach people how to use the software. And I'll give you another analogy. So imagine I give you Microsoft Word and I teach you everything about Microsoft Word. You are the world's expert in Microsoft Word. And I teach you no English. You are not, okay? And that's kind of what we do now. And so people get the software. They might be formally trained in the software. A lot of times they don't even get formal training. They have to figure it out on their own, or the software is somewhat easy to use so they can do some of the basics. But they're never taught the language of, in this case, visualization, right? There's rules to it. There's ways to think about it. And it's not just best practices. There's really kind of an underlying idea of it as a language. And so, again, it's not the fault of the people doing the work necessarily that they're creating a work product that's not as good as it could be. It's because it's just this idea that the software is going to do everything and that's enough. So you need this foundation for people to work from, just like we get a foundation when we're learning a language. So that's kind of the first piece you have to put into place. And then you move on to the idea of what is it that you actually are going to create. So as we had that little back and forth before where I said, you asked me you told me what you wanted, but then I built something and it really wasn't meeting your needs. And so it's breaking down that approach into something that's more customer oriented to really understand what your needs are. And it's not necessarily asking you in a way that says, what do you want, right? You have to really get to the point. And this is one of the big turning points in the thinking here, is that the data is not that important. So the data has always been the star of everything. And we use it in all our terms, right? Data engineering, data literacy, data storytelling, data visualization. And while data is used in it, it's become too much, in my opinion, of the focus, when really the goal is making decisions and taking actions, helping people do that. And so that's what we have to figure out. What is it that you're really trying to accomplish with this? It's like, almost think of it, if you were to go on Amazon and do a search, what would you be searching for? Well, that's what I want to know. That's really what you need. And we have to get to the heart of that. The challenge is teaching people how to do that, right? It's not something you necessarily know how to do. So we have to get you, not only teach you how to do it, but get you comfortable doing it in a way that you don't fall back in the way that you're used to doing it, which is kind of what we've already described. And so there's a lot of personal and cultural challenges that go along with this, almost to the level I call courage, right? You have to have the courage not only to think about doing it, but to actually do it when you're faced with the situation. You have to change how you've interacted with these people before. And then once you know that, there's ways to go about creating your product. And the goal is to help you create a product that somebody wants, do it with less effort, and do it actually in less time. And that's kind of what we've kind of cracked here. Because people get scared when they hear, oh, I have to do a process. It's going to take me a long time. It's going to take me more time, right? And so that, in thinking how to do it, that was a key aspect of creating this approach. So let me just stop there and see if you want, before we get to the third part, because the third part's kind of really different.
Yeah. So I love this concept of really starting to understand, what do you want to do? What's the decision you want to make? And what's the kind of action that you'll want to take once your decision's informed, right? And how many times have I seen dashboards get rolled out? I mean, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful dashboards. And I look at it and I say, that's really pretty. What's it telling me?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That is an art form. I've come across a few people in my time that had that mindset when they would go in and interact with the analytic stakeholder, if you will, to really understand, what are you going to do with it? And early on, when we would get the order, hey, I need sales data. Okay, why? Of course, I found out that asking why was not the way to go, because it was like, hey, it's my data. Who are you to tell me that I can? Yeah, just go get me my data. And then it just falls flat. Ergo, the 21% adoption rate out there. Interesting. Yeah. So the ready for market is really flushing out, what's the end goal? What's the news headline? What's the actionable insight that I can take? And great. All right.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned an interesting point, because you said headline, and that's a piece that we really focus on. So if you think about, again, this idea of a story, right? And so I mentioned before, I don't like saying dashboards and reports, because to me that's about data. So I said, well, okay, then what are they? So I kind of came up with this term, analytic stories, because it's supposed to tell you a story, but also supposed to help you do the analysis to kind of drive that thinking. And so every story should have a headline, right? And the headline has to be held up with everything on the page, right? Because you read the headline, and then everything else on the page should support that. And a lot of times our headlines on dashboards are things like sales performance, but with respect to what? So somebody reading that, depending who you are, you might immediately get your own picture of what you think you're going to see, right? So you're kind of tuned into something that you're expecting, and then everything else is not that. And so could be very confusing to you. So we really teach people to write headlines, and we like to get them to write them in forms of questions rather than statements, because a question activates your thinking. As humans, we're geared towards that. It's like you see a question and you want to answer it. And so that puts you in the perfect frame of mind for something that's analytical. And so that's a key thing. And we call this intent before content. So if I know what the intent is, then I should be able to develop what the content is that follows from that. And so it's kind of this principle that we use. It's also a test, right? So if you're going to put something on the page, you always look back and say, well, does it connect to what I said it was going to? Am I fulfilling that promise of what people are expecting? And kind of becomes a very important part of how we do our thinking.
Okay, so the intent is the part that you were talking about before. That's the star, right? And the content is the enabling data product to enable that analytic product to tell that story.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Because until you know, if you think about it this way, most people do the work today. It's like connect to the data, make a chart, put a title on the chart, and the chart usually has a pretty basic title too, right? Sales trends. You make a bunch of, and then you make a bunch of charts like that. You put them on a dashboard, and then you put a title on the dashboard. Our method is exactly opposite of that. Say, until you know what you want to communicate, how could you possibly know, number one, what data you need, and also what it should look like, right? So here it's like you do it kind of backward. It's done basically backwards today. So that's another big part of the problem is just that approach. So we've kind of switched it up. So it's not semantics. It really is changing the way you have to think about doing the work.
Okay, I got it. So better focus on the intent or the outcome that we're trying to achieve. Weave in the content, and then what about authoring? Is there that final step?
Yeah, there is actually. That comes at the end of that ready for market stage is when you can actually, the last thing you can do is actually go into the software and write. So I look at something like Tableau, Power BI, even whatever the software is. To me, that's Microsoft Word. That's my writing tool. So I have to, once I figure out what I want to write, then I can go in and it should be pretty easy. And at that point, I will have fleshed out and have agreement through that step of what I am going to create. And there's things we do in there to try to solidify that so that by the time you get to the writing part, you can go in and as long as you know the application pretty well, you should be able to do it pretty quickly. So you're saving, so you're really just using it for writing. It's not where you go in and just start experimenting with, boy, I hope this works, right? That which is kind of what we're thinking. Oh, I hope this is what they want. I hope they understand it when I show it to them. There's a lot of hope versus knowing, right? I want to know that it's going to resonate with you. Again, it's like a product, right? You don't just build a product and hope that when you put it out there, people want it, right? There's research, there's conversations, there's discussions about trying to build something that somebody wants.
And something they need, right?
Yeah.
Something they can't live without. All right. So I go through these steps for the ready to market. I'm done. Push it out. I'm gone.
Absolutely. That's it. You stop right there and you just go right on to the next one.
Yeah, right. And you contributed to the 79% of unadopted. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a third icon on your picture around going to market. So can you help me understand that part?
Yeah.
And help the audience.
Yeah, I think that this might have been the biggest breakthrough in thinking of taking this kind of product mindset to the approach. When you think about any product today, right, that's created, a company builds something. Let's just say it's Kellogg comes up with a new cereal. They don't just make it and that's it, and then send it to supermarkets, right? They do all kinds of things. They usually market what it is. They have to set up some kind of training and support, maybe some educational aspects of it, right? And then they want to know, are people buying it? Who's buying it, right? And then ultimately they want to know, do people like it, and all those kinds of things. But we don't do that. Like you said, we just pump this stuff out, and then it gets sent up, through emails, or it goes up to a web browser or something like that. And then when you ask somebody, well, how's it working? How's it doing? And usually the response is something, well, we got, if it's even being used, right? Oh, we had 2,000 views of our dashboard. And I might say, so? And they think, what do you mean so? That's a lot. That's like saying 2,000 people came to your website, but you don't know what they did. And that's what we do. So we just throw this stuff out and kind of on a wing and a prayer, hope that people use it, and then we have no clue that what they're even doing with it. So this go to market says, well, let's do what usually happens when someone launches a product. We might have to do some marketing. We may have to do some education about it, right? We want to definitely know how people are using it, who's using it, when are they using it, right? So that's that stuff we can measure today. And then ultimately we want to know, did it actually serve its purpose? And so that sounds something like, I come back to you and say, Mike, I see you've been using this every Tuesday and Thursday at 9:27 a.m. I'm curious, why that time? What have you learned from this? Have you made any decisions, taking any action? What happened from that? Did it turn out the way you expected? Was it better? Was it worse? Right? I need to, and that last part only comes through talking to you, right? It's not something I can measure necessarily. I really need to find out, what did you do with it? Right? Or do you come in every week and you're like, yeah, I look at it, but it's not really helpful. So just measuring, that's like the page use thing, right? You came in and looked at it, that's not a measure of success. That's just a measure of activity that I should understand why you're doing it. So that's really the go-to-market piece that's done very little of today. Maybe, again, that middle piece where they look at some stats on it, but without really understanding what it really means to the usage.
Yeah, what's the story the stats are telling you, right?
Yeah.
All the BI tools, well, I shouldn't say all, but I would suspect just about every BI tool has a vehicle for us to go and look and see who's using what, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't measure value. It measures activity, maybe. So is there additional telemetry that we can build in outside of talking with the end consumer, the analytics stakeholder?
Well, yeah, I do think that, like you said, a lot of the applications have some level of measurement today. And you certainly need to take advantage of that. I think, again, most of it probably is at a highest level, something like just measuring the basics, not looking at it all the way down to the user level. Possibly, certainly knowing who your key users are and following what their behavior is. And then, again, treating it like a product. You could have customer segmentation. You can have the occasional user, you can have the high volume user, you can have the high frequency user, right? There's all kinds of things that you need to understand, not just X views. That's
And analytic products in and of themselves aren't going to move the needle. They don't move the needle. They don't generate more sales or generate higher take rates, right? But if that's the intent, that this is why I need this analytic product, because this is the needle I want to move, we can at least do some corollary analysis, right? So since we've been using this product, we are seeing that we're moving the needle in the direction intended.
Yeah.
So during the intent, do you flesh out what that needle is we want to move and try to get people to put a stake in the ground up by how much you want to move the needle?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a common problem today, regardless of this work, right? People just measure a number, and then when you ask them, well, is that good or bad? They're like, eh. They're like, we don't have a target for that. It's like, well, if you don't have a target for it, why are you measuring it? How is that going to help you figure out if you need to care? And most people, even, and this is something I think is pretty simple, people can fix. Even if you don't have a formal target, I always work with my clients, said, you've been in the business long enough, so you have a general sense of what goes on here. Put a number down. Let's come up with something that's reasonable. Maybe you have to list your assumptions, and it might not be right, but it's a starting point. for you to see. And if someone asks where the number comes from because they don't agree, then you can say what your assumptions are, and then you can review the assumptions together and adjust it. But if you go with nothing, then you really can't figure out if something is actionable or not. Right? Nobody can, because there's no gauges if it's where you expect it to be or not. And I think that's something everybody could do today, because they do know. It just may not be a formal part of that they've documented.
Well, what's intriguing though is, most companies do some kind of annual planning, right? And those annual plans have targets, right? And those targets should be getting decomposed down into different functional areas. What's marketing going to do to move the needle? What's sales going to do? What's customer service going to do to move the needle for better NPS scores or whatnot, right? And get those targets. Why can't we embed those targets into the story, right?
It's a mystery.
Yeah, just so that the headline doesn't say, here's the sales performance, but maybe here's achievement to target or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said earlier, the goal is to spend the least amount of time as possible in the software. What's the result of doing that? I mean, if I'm not spending a lot of time in the software, how am I producing better product in a shorter amount of time?
Yeah. So, well, here's part of the problem in general is when you start with the software, one, you're not really sure where you're going. That's part of it. But also you get very tangled up in the software very quickly with stuff that doesn't matter. You're worried about how it looks. You're worried about all these little, design issues, the fonts, right? All these things that are more on the higher level layer of what you're presenting, and they're important. But in the beginning, all that's important is figuring out, can I create something that gets the message across? That's what you need to know. And so we actually, before you get into the software, we have a process we call storyboarding, which isn't anything we made up. But if you think about something that's really expensive, like making a movie, right? If you're Steven Spielberg and someone hands you a script, you don't start shooting the movie right away, right? You go through this process called storyboarding, because if you shot the movie just from the script, it probably wouldn't come out really very well. So they lay out the frames, they have artists who do sketches, and they lay out what they think the story should be like, and then they rearrange them and figure. Once they know that, then they go and they shoot the movie. Of course, shooting a movie can still take a long time, but it's this idea that they want to get it as close to what they envision before they start doing the expensive part. And so it's the same here, is before we go in and spend all the time in the software, which is the expensive part, can be the expensive part of it, we want to prepare. So we steal all these ideas from the movie making process and apply them into this approach. That way, by the time you get to the software, you're pretty sure what you're going to build. And so, and now if you're really good at writing in the software, you're just going to breeze through this, because you're like, I already know, I've already got agreement from my audience what this should achieve. We've discussed it. I've shown them some ideas already for that. Now you might say, oh, but I could prototype it and show you that in the software, right? And I could do that really fastly. That's not a problem because I'm good at the software. The thing that happens though, if I do that and show it to you, the first thing you think of is, wow, he's almost done. He did it. And so which is not the case. Even if I tell you that, hey, this is just, a starting point, you're already thinking, yeah, it looks pretty good. This is good enough.
Yeah.
And and so that's not the dynamic you want to create. And so when you show someone a storyboard, which is really going to be a rough sketch, we don't need artists to do this for us, like in the movie making approach. We're just doing something rough by hand. You could even do it in PowerPoint if you wanted to, not, if you wanted it to look a little nicer. But the idea is to go really fast. And I show it to you and you're like, I have no idea what that is. Okay, next page, right? I can go and do another one. And maybe I even do it right in front of you because you give me some feedback and I say, well, is this closer to what you're thinking about, right? So it's not saying what you want necessarily, like when you say, oh, I need a pie chart. That's not what we're talking about here. I'm trying to show you something and see if you understand, if it reflects back what you said to me, you're trying to understand. And that way, and when I show it to you as a sketch, you're like, you already obviously know it's not the finished product. So you're going to be more willing to comment on it and not think that it's like almost locked and loaded and ready to go. So I also want to create that dynamic between us so that I can get the feedback I want and you really give it the thinking. And this is another important fact. A lot of times the data is not ready.
Oh,
a lot of time, and right. And so how many times have you heard, well, we can't start making the dashboard because the data is not ready. Okay. Well, that's bad, right? So I have to sit here and wait for that. In this case, I don't need the data to sketch something out, right? I can just sketch it to approximate what it might look like and show it to you again to get the idea across. It actually may even feedback ideas to people who are working on getting the data together. We might discover something in that phase that is important about how the data needs to be represented that would be better done back, say, in the database versus people manipulating it in the visualization software. So there's a lot of dynamics there and reasons for not going into the software.
I heard a real clear message there. I think that be wary of form over function.
Absolutely.
Working on the design elements, and the function is not being addressed. Interesting, very interesting. That's a good tip. We do have a question in. I'm going to ask and see if you can respond to it. Could you ask Lee to show us some visual examples of a good story?
I don't have one pulled up, so maybe at the end, if we have some time, I can go and dig through my files and pull one up. Yeah, it actually brings up another point. The other thing about the intent before content and staying out of the software. So when you go in and use the software, at that moment, you're only able to use it with what you know at that moment. Okay, so follow me through this. Might sound a little bit odd. So when you are sketching out an idea, right? And if you go back to this intent before content, and I say, what is the best way for me to show this idea? I might draw something out. And then at some point I might say, oh, how do I actually do that in the software? And so there's all this kind of this innovation component to it, where a lot of times you create something that it would not be obvious if you just say chose from the chart picker, or you made the charts that you knew how to make. Because a lot of times in the software, you can combine ideas and create new things that you would have missed if you didn't think about really the best way. And maybe you can't do it 100% exactly how you want, but let's say you got 90% of what you were thinking of. That would be a huge improvement over if you just chose or you just did what you only knew how to do again at that moment. So you're really missing an opportunity again by just going into the software.
All right, missing that innovation element. Yeah, interesting. So we mentioned your ebook there, and it sounds like you've got a pretty robust set of techniques. Is there a way for people to learn about this?
Well, so the ebook is, and I don't want to oversell what the ebook is. It's a very practical and short ebook to basically help you. I mentioned this idea before about writing questions. And so it's a kind of a starter kit to help you think about, oh, here's some common things I might do in my work and how I might do them today, how I might say them as more statements, and how I would rephrase them as questions. So it's to get you in that mindset of changing your thinking over, and that simple idea can start to transform even your basic dashboards today. So you could just take that and say, I'm going to tackle my dashboard as is today. I'm going to just try to change the titles. And when you do that, you might say, oh, well, if that's the title I want, I'm looking at the chart and now there's a mismatch, or it might match.
Mm-hmm.
But then, so that's going to get your thinking going to that next stage, right? Of, okay, now I need to change it. So it starts you on that path without saying, oh, I have to go and relearn everything I've ever done, right? Because to me, that's not practical. I always want to give people something that they can start that change without feeling overwhelmed, right? So you have to do it. And this whole, right, everything I talked about is not only changing how you do your work, but we talked about some of the interpersonal issues too that have to be overcome, right? And cultural issues too, right? Like you said, just get me the data. Well, if you say that to me and I'm the CEO, or you're the CEO and you say that to me, right? And now I have to have a way to say, no, not no. I'm not going to say no, but I need a way to come to respond to you in a way that says no, but nicely, and as a way that moves the conversation forward. So that's a tough one, right? Because then I might be like, well, if that's the CEO, I have to just do what they say. You know, and if you're a good CEO, you probably would prefer me to do it the way that's going to be more effective versus the way that you think it should be done when you don't even know how to do my job, right? So, but it's not necessarily easy to do that. Just because of those hierarchies that people get stuck in. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of just broader conversations, you know, of course, on my website, I lay some of this stuff out. I even just love to talk to folks about this. If it's something that people are running internal, say, user groups at their companies, I have a few webinars even that I'm always happy to do. They don't cost anything. You know, you can ask me to do them. And if, you know, it seems like it's a good fit, it's really easy for me. I'm always open to do that because I think people need to to think about these ideas. So it's kind of like planting seeds of, hey, and it's not for everybody either, because if you're a company and you might hear what I have to say and be like, that's never going to work here, or we don't want to change that much, right? Because mine is a system for the most part. So if you don't think you can do it, or you're not willing to do it, it's really not going to help you either, right? Because it's if you only do a little of it, sometimes it's not really going to move, as you said, move the needle. You know, it might make you a little more efficient. Your dashboards might look a little bit better, but end to end, you're not going to transform. That's really what we're talking about here. Ultimately, it's really a transformation of the way the work gets done within your team or potentially across the company, because everybody's working with data today in some fashion. Right. And so in some ways, everybody in a company should be using some elements of this change management that I'm talking about. Not necessarily all of it or to the same extent, but elements of it.
Yeah, well, and to become a gifted artist, it takes practice over and over again. Try things, learn from each thing. Oh, we got a question here from Chris Beck.
Yeah.
What to do when there's a change in the top management directors and they want to redo all the reporting initiatives? That's a good one.
Yeah. Well, when you say, I mean, there's some big words in there: redo and all. Right? And so I'd want to understand what that means. Right? If let's say you came to me and asked me to do that, we were talking about it as a project, right? I'd want to understand, okay, you have a motivation for doing that. What made you think about wanting to do it? And I've heard lots of different things like this, right? Sometimes it's someone wants to bring in a new technology, so they just kind of say, well, we have to do it because we got to port everything over. That could be one thing. Or someone comes in and they, you know, I did it this way at my old company and I want to do it this way here, right? So that's just the way it is. So it's really understanding first the motivation behind it before just saying whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. right? So it's that would be the first thing I'd like to understand is why are you going to make the investment, and what do you expect? And when it's done, what is it that you expect to be different, right? So not only the why, what is it that you're seeing today? And when it was all done, if you could wave a magic wand today and you had all your resources that needed to do it, and it was finished tomorrow, how would the world be different? What would you expect to be different? So I'd want to have a picture of that, in my head to get to see. It's not necessarily yes or no at this point. It's just I wouldn't know how to even tackle the problem until someone was able to lay that out for me.
Yeah, and without really getting underneath the intent again, right? Because we did a software first thing. I could be forced into doing this lift and shift, and all I did was I moved the technical debt to a new set of software.
Absolutely, right.
Right.
Or you might redo it, but then you say, okay, if we're going to redo it, let's not just copy what we did, right? I hear stories of someone getting a new technology and they say, well, all we did was copied our Excel reports. Like, okay, great. And so now you made a fancy Excel spreadsheet, a fancier Excel spreadsheet kind of thing. Or they made it look nice. And so now all they did was make a fancy interface into the database or something like that. But is that a game changer? Is that really going to move the company in the direction it's trying to? Probably not. And I think that goes back to the first thing you said is why a lot of this just goes unused or underutilized.
Yeah, and that's a lot of investment of software that's not producing the value.
Yeah.
So Lee, do you have workshops that you offer to customers or a training curriculum, or how do people learn more about what you are sharing with us today, which is really compelling?
Yeah, a lot of it, well, like I said, part of it comes just through these webinars that I do, which are just, they're not sales pitches, it's just educational. So, and they're really designed to just give people those few thought nuggets and things that are actionable, a few things. Just here's a couple little things you could try. And those are, people love those because they're like, oh, I see how I could take what I'm doing today and make a little change, right? They don't expect, the skies to part and the sun to shine, and all the great things happen right from that. But I like to do those. And then, I mean, from a real education standpoint, it's really usually companies who are bringing me in, and we're working with a team, and they're going through they can go through a workshop, which is just learning some of the stuff, but a lot of companies like to go through the whole system, which is end to end, right? Which is really over time, they're learning, but they're doing, right? So it's really it's almost like going back to school, not that level, right? But you have to learn it, and then they have to apply it to a little project and then launch, like we talked about. So they launch it, and then they have to do all those other things and go to market. And they need help doing that, right? So it's me helping them through the end, rather than, you could read it, I could write a blog about it, but just reading the blog post, it's hard to execute, right?
Yeah.
Because of all the underlying components to it and the human elements that come in. It's like you have to push yourself, and it's almost like being, a counselor or a therapist with some of these things. A cheerleader, right? Come on, you can do it, Mike. We're doing it in a safe environment. You got to do it. If you can't do it here where it's safe, how are you going to do it when it really matters?
Yeah, but I don't want to change. It's change, right?
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah. I mean, I've been through it because I did it originally, right? So I know it's tough, and that's why I'm very empathetic to people doing it this way.
Very good. Another question that came in while we were chatting. What role do you think self-service plays in increasing that adoption percentage of products? Yeah.
It's a really good question. I have mixed feelings about this. Actually, I've been doing some thinking about this recently. So I think self-service has been a great marketing concept. I think it was really smart in the idea of painting a vision of, hey, you can build something and then kind of have a you can have single distribution and then lots of people accessing it. I think what that created, though, was this idea of, I'm going to build a dashboard. And when I say dashboard, it could be a few, right? A project. And it's going to be for you, Mike, and you, Colin, and you, and you, and you, and you. Right? And so you're building it for everybody. And so what happens is it ends up serving nobody very well.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about, again, if you go back to this idea of a product, when you build a product, you build it for a specific set of consumers. You don't necessarily some products, of course, are meant to be mass market kinds of things that, they're generic enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
But many products are built for specific consumers. And that's really another big idea change here is that you can't, it's still self-service in a way, right? I'm giving it to you. I'm teaching you how to use it, right? I'm teaching you how to even maybe do some analysis with it, right? Not expecting, because I made a beautiful dashboard that followed all the best practices, that I'm going to give it to you who has no real analytic skills, right? Because that's a real skill, right? You can make the most amazing dashboard, right?
Mm-hmm.
But giving it to these people who aren't analysts by nature doesn't mean they're going to be able to use it to do an analysis. I mean, that's a huge gap in the thinking with all this. Mm-hmm. So I think the idea of self-service has actually created a lot of these problems in itself because of the nature of how people perceive what self-service is, and a lot of the missing parts that happen because of that approach.
Mm-hmm. So again, be wary of putting the software first. Even if it's self-service, great. I'm going to enable enterprises to do ad hoc analysis at scale to find discover new things. That's great, but keep in mind intent as part of that. To your earlier point, and keep in mind that we're building an analytic product. Keep that product management mindset top of mind.
Yeah.
Even
absolutely.
if you're doing
it's not that the idea of self-service in itself is bad, right? Letting people go, if you look at it from the perspective of saying, well, I don't want to have to go to you and ask you for stuff all the time, and I can give it to you and make it available, that's great. Okay. But not just in kind of the way, but then the way people have actually executed on that is more just like taking the old way of it and just kind of porting it into without rethinking how to actually live in that environment.
Yeah, keep in mind the educational component, right? The analytic skills, analytic product mindset. Think about the intent and the outcome before you slap a check.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Lee, fascinating dialogue, sir. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your thought leadership with the audience today.
Yeah, I hope we got a few gears turning for folks just to say, okay, these are some interesting ideas. Sometimes they just take a while to sink in and think like, oh yeah, I get kind of where he's going with this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and this is built upon years of experience, practitioner experience as well. So
yeah,
you have to at least appreciate that. Yeah. Very good. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Thank you for having me.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
Hannah, do we have any calls to action?
Well, I've already shared the link out with everybody to get the ebook that we were referencing on the call today. And then for us, of course, you can always reach us at greatdataminds.com. We have all of our upcoming events listed there. And I just want to echo your sentiment. Thank you, Lee. This was a really great conversation about sort of broadening the view of what it is when we're putting together these dashboards and, adopting from marketing, adopting from product management. I think it's well well heard on these ears.
Excellent. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lee. Yep. And thanks everybody for joining us. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
so long.